You could ask, like Tina Turner did in 1984, what's love got to do with it? But it's hard to ask that question after reading our scripture passage for today, 1 Corinthians 13. After reading this passage of scripture, I think it is evident that love has everything to do with it, to do with us, to do with our world. In fact, love matters most. This is perhaps the Apostle Paul's most eloquent and best known writing. Part of this passage is often read at weddings. It is quoted often and widely in a variety of settings. You have seen it on t-shirts and coffee cups, framed art and posters. Phrases of it are done in Facebook memes. You've seen it quoted widely, all around. Usually when we hear this passage, we only hear 4 verses. The 4 verses that could be considered a poem about love. You know, love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. Love does not rejoice in injustice, but rejoices whenever truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. While those words are beautiful, and they are an important part of this passage, there is more to this passage than just these 4 short verses. So today I want to explore the whole of 1 Corinthians 13. It says some really important things about love. The first 3 verses Paul lifts up. In those verses, he lifts up the magnitude of love. He says, if I could speak in all the languages of the earth and of angels, but I didn't love others, I would only be a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. That would be a pretty major feat if you and I could speak in all the languages of the world. I mean, it's a pretty major feat if we can speak a couple of different languages, but all the languages of the world? And he doesn't stop there. He says, if you can also speak in the language of angels. Never heard of that, but what is that? It would be a major feat if we could do that. And as major as that is, it is nothing. Paul says, it is nothing if we don't have an ability to love others. Paul is making it clear that loving others is a huge deal. Love matters most. Then he goes on and he says in a second of 3 illustrations, he says, if I had the gift of prophecy, and if I understood all of the secrets of God, and possessed all knowledge. And he doesn't stop there. He says, if I had faith enough that I could move mountains, but I didn't love others, I would be nothing. Nothing. Here's the second of 3 illustrations where Paul is making it clear that the magnitude and importance of love, think about it. If you understood all of God's secret plans and you knew everything, but he doesn't stop there. He even adds, if you had faith to move mountains, that's huge. But he says it's nothing. Nothing if you don't love others. You see, love matters most. And then he goes on and he says, if I gave everything I had to the poor, and sacrificed my body, I could boast about it. But if I didn't love others, I would have gained nothing. In keeping with the first two, Paul adds another illustration on the importance of the magnitude of love. If you gave away everything that you have, that's huge. Even if you did that, but you didn't love others, you would gain nothing. Because you see, love matters most. Now, I doubt that Paul is serious about the need to give everything away. But I'm sure that he is serious about how important it is to love others. And that's the case that he's making here. Love matters most. Once he makes the case about the magnitude of love, he turns his attention to defining love, which is real important. It's easy to say to someone, I love you. But as we all know, there is a huge difference between words and actions. Saying you love someone doesn't mean that you act in loving ways toward them. Let's hold on to looking at the definition of love for a few minutes, and let's look at the ending verses of this passage. You see, prophecy and speaking in unknown languages and special knowledge will become useless. But love lasts forever. Here, Paul deals with an issue the church in Corinth was having. Namely, some were speaking in tongues, and they were feeling that this made them more important, or it made them a better or more faithful follower of Jesus. You see, this ability to speak in tongues was a way of elevating themselves. But Paul says, hold on, not so fast. Being able to prophesy about the future and being able to speak in tongues means absolutely nothing if you don't love others. Next up is a real important point Paul makes. He says in verse 9, now our knowledge is partial and incomplete, and even the gift of prophecy reveals only a part of the whole picture. But when the time of perfection comes, these partial things will become useless. When I was a child, I spoke and thought and reasoned like a child. But when I grew up, I put away childish things. Now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror. But then we will see everything with perfect clarity. All that I know now is partial and incomplete. But then I will know everything completely, just as God now knows me completely. It is real important for us to understand what Paul is saying here. No matter how much we think we know about God, it is nothing in comparison to the vastness of God. And no matter how much we think we know God, we only see a minuscule part of who God is. In my home congregation, there was one particular lady who always came up to me and other people on Sunday mornings, or she would stand up at the end of a service and say, I just got to tell you, the Lord has told me to tell you. She always said it. Every Sunday she would say something to somebody. The Lord has told me to tell you. She always had the inside track. But did she? Somehow I doubt it. I mean, I've had times and experiences where I felt really strongly that the Lord is impressing something on me. But it's not an everyday or an every week occurrence where I feel so strongly that I have to proclaim, the Lord has told me. as if I know everything about the Lord. You see, I've been in a relationship with Jesus since 1976, which is a lot of years. And I've been serious about seeking after God and desiring to know God for most of those years. But whatever I know about God, whatever I think I know about God, it's only a small speck of who God is. And that's real important for us to understand, lest we elevate ourselves to a position, the position and status of God. And one of the areas that I've grown most over the years is in understanding a little bit more about what love is and how important love is in who God calls us to be and what God calls us to do as followers of Jesus and as the church. You know, if you've been around here for any length of time, that I used to think it was all about receiving love, giving love, and repeating that process. And while it is, a couple of years ago, I changed that. I changed my perspective. I changed that phrase. I changed the word repeat to become love. Because I came to an understanding that this is truly the work that God calls us to in the world. To receive His love, to give His love, and to become love. Now, becoming love is a process that never fully completes itself. We are constantly learning how to love better. We are constantly learning how to love more. We are constantly learning how to love more widely and wildly. And our model for that is Jesus. He said that everything depends on love. My paraphrase, actually, his words were, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. And then he said, and all the law and prophets hang on these two. In other words, he was saying that love matters most. Everything can be boiled down to becoming love in our world. Paul concludes this beautiful section of Scripture by saying this. He says, 3 things will last forever: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Like Jesus, Paul is saying love matters most. With it firmly established in our hearts and minds that love matters most, we can turn our attention to defining love. Here is Paul's beautiful definition of what love is, as a reminder. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. Love does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, always is hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. Isn't that beautiful? We could learn a thing or two from that definition of love. It's hard to become love. It's a process. It's something that we work at all our lives. It's something that we fail at often. It's like a dance step. 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, 1 step back, a step left, a step right, a step forward, a step back. But don't give up. Keep dancing. Keep becoming love. Some have said that a good way to visualize this becoming reality in your life is to substitute your name for the word love. So if your name were John, you would read this section this way. John is patient and kind. John is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. John does not demand on his own way. John is not irritable. John keeps no record of being wrong. John does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever truth wins out. John never gives up, never loses faith. John is always hopeful and endures through every circumstances. So what's love got to do with it? Everything. Absolutely everything. As both Jesus and Paul make it clear, love matters most. In a race, athlete Abel Mutau, representing Kenya, was just a few feet from the finish line, but he was confused with the signage that he saw and he stopped, thinking he had completed the race. A Spanish athlete, Ivan Fernandez, was right behind him, and realizing what was happening, he started shouting at the Kenyan for him to continue running. But Mutau didn't know Spanish and he didn't understand. Then Ivan Fernandez pushed him to victory. A journalist asked Ivan after the race, "Why did you do that?" And Ivan replied, "My dream is that someday we can have that kind of community." The journalist insisted, "But why did you let the Kenyan win?" Ivan replied, "I didn't let him win. He was going to win." The journalist insisted again, "But you could have won." Ivan looked at him and replied, "But what would be the merit of that victory? What would be the honor of that medal? And what would my mom think of that? I did win. I did what was right." Brothers and sisters, you see, one of the major components of love is an ability to think less of self and more of others, even putting others before yourself. In July of this year, 2020, just a few weeks ago, I'm told that a Kentucky garbage man noticed that the trash cans were not being put out at an elderly woman's home on his route for several straight weeks. He was concerned enough to share the address with his supervisor, and she found the name of the woman at the address and called her. "Mrs. Smith, we noticed that you haven't been putting your trash cans out for a while. Are you okay?" Mrs. Smith replied, "I'm okay. But my caretaker was so afraid of the virus that she stopped coming, and I can't get to the store, and I don't have any trash because I've run out of food. I don't have any family to help me." After a long pause, the caller said, "You do now. We are your family." Then she called her truck driver and let him know the sad news. The next day, on his day off, he knocked on Mrs. Smith's door and asked her if she would make up a grocery list. She did. And when he looked down at the list, he looked at her and said, "Mrs. Smith, this list is too short." And she added a few more items. "Mrs. Smith, this list is still too short. Would you mind if I looked in your fridge?" She relented, and he opened the fridge, and it was bare, empty. An hour later, he brought her in dozens of bags of groceries for a woman he didn't really know. You see, brothers and sisters, the goal of our lives as followers of Jesus, then, is to become love. We do that by looking out for the needs of others. We do that by receiving God's love in our lives, given to us in Jesus Christ, and giving that love to others. All others, without exception. And as we do those two things, receive love and give love, we slowly see ourselves becoming love. May it be so in each of our lives.